Shabbat Shalom. And thank you all for being here. Happy Earth Day. Happy birthday, Susan Meyer. In Exodus, we are taught that Moses and the Israelites received the commandments from God. In my legal mind, this is the Jewish Constitution. In Leviticus, Moses provided the rules and regulations for how to live and survive, how to behave, how to stay pure, and it was the Kohans, the priests in their tunics, who governed all aspects of life. My Tazria Parsha deals specifically with the Kohan's declaration that if in a person a white inflammation streaked with red is lower than the rest of the skin, and if the hair in it has turned white, that person is to be pronounced zara'at, unclean, infected, and impure. Although the Parsha specifically refers to it as a leprous infection, commentaries have broadly interpreted the skin disease as resulting from God's displeasure at many behaviors, from gossiping to sexual deviancy. This diagnosis by the priests had its consequences, the most severe which included exclusion and banishment in order to safeguard the rest of the population. When I told some friends what my Parsha is about, the general reaction was, "Oi, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do with that?" But I knew exactly how I would tackle it. As an immigration lawyer for more than 40 years, I've been dealing with modern laws of exclusion, laws enacted and imposed by American Kohans, our country's lawmakers in gray suits and black robes, laws imposed on outsiders found to be infected and impure. The goal of these laws? To keep the country safe, no different from the ancient one. Despite calling itself a nation of immigrants, the United States has not, and continues to this day, to not welcome many strangers. Rules and regulations covering a myriad of reasons have historically determined which foreign nationals can and cannot pass through our borders. To me, this Parsha speaks directly to the exclusion of many so-called impure aliens. Statutory health exclusion began with the enactment of the Immigration Act of 1891, which barred persons suffering from a loathsome or a dangerous contagious disease. Variations and expansions of the law followed, with the 1903 Act also excluding the insane as time went on. As time went on, the list of medical and psychiatric conditions grew longer to include flat feet, poor eyesight, varicose veins, depression, imbeciles, and people with homicidal tendencies. Italians, Jews, Chinese, so many were barred from entering despite Emma Lazarus' immortal words, which we read earlier this morning on the Statute of Liberty. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, the law in effect when I began practicing in 1979, specifically excluded aliens afflicted with a psychopathic personality, epilepsy, or a mental defect. In 1965, Congress had eliminated epilepsy and had added sexual deviation. Well, guess who that meant? You're right. For many years, the United States was the only country with an explicit policy of excluding visitors and those seeking to immigrate because of their sexual identity. Although the word homosexual never appeared in U.S. immigration laws, most of its courts interpreted the provision to require the exclusion of any person who identified as homosexual or who engaged in homosexual acts. Had I been older and out when my family immigrated to the U.S. from Cuba, I too would have been kept away. Nobody knows the number of persons affected by that provision since no statistics were kept. I had one case where my client was fortunate not to have been among them. He was French. The officers at the airport found a gay magazine in his suitcase, and he was put in exclusion proceedings. As we walked into court, I smiled at our luck. Both the judge and the prosecutor were gay. Members of CBST. Admitted was stamped on his passport. In 1973, the American Psychiatric Association revised its Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders and stopped classifying homosexuality as a mental disorder. A watershed moment in many areas, it took Congress 17 years with the 1990 Act to eliminate the automatic exclusion of lesbians and gay from the United States. However, that same 1990 Act recodified the grounds of exclusion to include any alien who's determined to have a communicable disease of public significance. Well, guess what communicable disease was added in 1993? You're right again. You're all so smart. It was HIV. It was not the discovery of the virus alone, but the political and economic climate at the time that led to the ban. As the AIDS epidemic exploded in the US, public fear and misunderstanding about the disease fed into the growing fear of foreigners, which was certainly misguided given that the US had more known cases than anywhere else in the world. For 22 years, the ban obviously had huge ramifications. Many scientific, health, and gay rights conferences could not be held here. And most drastically, many foreigners, most who had contracted the disease in the United States, were again subject to exclusion. Many of them, for example, had been here with employment visas and were in loving relationships with US citizens, relationships which had not yet been recognized by any federal law. In my practice, impacted so tragically was a client, a French executive at a French bank in New York. He had told the bank's immigration lawyers that he had been infected. The lawyers refused to extend his stay, and Christophe had no chance but to leave the US. His partner, unable to leave with him, committed suicide. On January 4, 2010, a new federal law went into effect that lifted the ban. This reversal was the result of the hard work of activists, several of them are here today, who pushed Congress and the Obama administration. For queer folk and people with HIV living in countries where they had to hide in very deep closets and or be denied HIV medication, the removal of both these grounds of inadmissibility made the US, for the first time, a possible haven for their protection from persecution. Prior to that, one could not very well ask for shelter inside a tent that did not let them in. Now all they had to do was get here. It was in 1990 that I had the privilege to successfully represent the first gay asylum seeker at an asylum office, a textile designer from Iran, where gays are subject to severe punishment mandated by its Sharia laws. Years later, the same permanent safety was granted to a woman with HIV from Burkina Faso. It is an honor to do this work. There is almost nothing like the smile and tears on the face of someone at the moment their lives are changed with the grant of asylum. The many volunteers doing this work here at CBST's ARC Immigration Clinic know exactly what I mean. Allow me to digress a bit beyond this country's historical exclusion of the undesirable. The rest of the world has too many times experienced attempts to rid itself of the impure. We know that the Nazi regime was driven to purify the Aryan race by exterminating the Jews, who Hitler called the race tuberculosis of the people, and the gays, actually as infectious and as dangerous as the plague. But as Rabbi Kleinbaum recently taught us, these horrors can also be viewed as gamzul tova, also for the good. God gave us lemons for a reason, and making lemonade out of the atrocity, I can happily say that were it not for the Holocaust, my sister Michelle and I would not be here. We are the children of a couple deemed impure that met and fell in love while hiding from the Gestapo in southwestern France. The cleansing continues to this day. The Rohingya in Myanmar, the Uyghurs in China, the gays in Uganda. So how do I want to end this bit of an immigration law history lesson inspired by my Parsha? By sharing with you what to me and to so many is holy about the CBST community. Yes, it welcomed me many years ago when I knew absolutely nothing about Judaism. Now, knowing a little bit, it has helped lead me on a path to feel and be more Jewish. So here I stand. And this community has allowed me to bring inside it what I do outside. Working together with so many incredible people, CBST has opened its tent to the stranger, be they a gay high school student, a trans woman from Williamsburg, or a lesbian from the West Indies. This community's open doors shout that no one should live a life of exclusion for who they are, because in so many ways, we are all strangers. We all have blemishes, and yet we are all so magnificent. This synagogue makes it possible for each one of us to meet our obligations, to welcome each other, and to help heal the world. Shabbat Shalom.